Rejection sucks. I've been in an academic professional career for a little over 2 decades, and I would love to say that rejection gets easier with time in your professional career, but all I can really do is say that the way in which it sucks evolves over time as you go from being junior in your career to being more senior. And that's what I want to explore a little bit in today's Hacking Academia video. So this year has been initially a pretty brutal year in terms of paper rejections and center or grant rejections. And inevitably in a career like academia or research, you will go through these periods where it seems like all the odds are stacked against you, fate has conspired against you, and you will get rejection after rejection after rejection. Over my career to date, I've probably been involved in maybe around 1,000 paper submissions of one type or another, and many dozens of grant and fellowship and center applications. And overall, you are getting rejected more often than not. There's also, of course, things like prize applications and awards as well. So getting used to rejection is very necessarily a part of being in an academic or a research career. Now, early on in the career, and I remember this when I was a PhD student, getting some of our papers rejected, it can feel very personal. It feels, even if it wasn't intended this way, that the reviewers who have rejected your paper are personally attacking you, personally attacking your work. And in some cases, because they're toxic reviews, this is true, but most of the time, it's not that they're really individually attacking you. They've got some constructive criticism and suggestions for improvements about the work you've submitted. But early in your career, especially without the benefit of experience, it can be very hard not to take it personally. And that's when your supervisors and your friends and your colleagues are very useful in providing you some context and providing you some support. But what I want to do is talk about how the nature of rejection and why rejection sucks in different ways as you progress through your career in today's video. So much later in your career, often you might be supervising or leading a small or large research team or even a center, and rejections that you are involved in, so for example grants or papers, they still really suck. So that feeling of a rejection being incredibly disappointing, at least for me, has never ever really gone away. But the way in which you process it definitely does change. And I will give you a couple of examples around how rejection perhaps sucks even more as you become more senior in your career, but also how it sucks a little bit less. And give you some details about why that's the case. So after you've been through many hundreds of rejections, and assuming you've been lucky enough to survive in your research or academic career, you very much should have that bigger picture perspective, which is simply that you know, because you now have a reasonably statistically significant sample size, that over the medium and long term, you're doing good work, you're putting in good proposals or good papers, and you know that you'll achieve a certain rate of success with those applications, even if you go through bad streaks. And if you're particularly objective about it, you'll also understand, of course, that there is natural statistical variation. And so even though subsequent submissions of papers or grants are not purely speaking statistically independent, because you will, for example, improve them from one application to the next, you know that you can still go through a long streak of rejections, and it can be particularly brutal. I've mentioned in other videos and talks that the opposite can occur for early career academics, where early in your career you happen to have like 100% run of getting everything accepted, and that's fantastic, but it means that when you eventually hit that bad streak of getting a bunch of rejections over a certain time period, it can be especially brutal because it's a new experience for you and you had such a positive start and experience to your career. As an experienced researcher or academic, you also have that perspective that you can probably improve your submission. You can take what feedback was actually useful from the reviews or the comments or the general feedback and submit an improved version. You know that the chances of that improved version, all other things being equal, will be significantly high, and you know that there's a reasonable chance that you'll get it in eventually. It may take multiple submissions. Academia is full of examples of people getting grants or fellowships or papers accepted on their second, third, fourth or fifth try, and sometimes even longer than that in particularly challenging and tenacious cases. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that getting rejected still sucks, but it sucks in different ways as you get older and more senior in your career. So one key example of this is simply that while rejection may become a little less personal when you're managing a research group or even a center, what does really come to the forefront is you become very stressed and concerned about the people other than yourself who are involved in the proposal, especially if they are early career academics or researchers who are leading the work, whether it's a paper or a grant. So the classical examples of this would be PhDs who you're supervising, could also be postdocs, it could even be staff in your org unit or your center that you mentor or supervise. And there'll be lots of concerns here. If you're a PhD, if it's a PhD student involved, you'll be worried about how this affects the overall timeline and likelihood of them having a successful, fulfilling PhD. And so the concern will be not so much about your personal effect, because as you become more senior, the implications of any one single rejection become less significant individually. The concern will be about the people who are in your care, who are trying to mentor and nurture and develop into successful careers. So it still sucks. It just sucks in a different way. Finally, once you become really experienced in your career, you will have this understanding, perhaps relatively implicit, that there will be stages in your career where you can no longer compete or contribute in a certain area. It's very natural for a career to go through various stages, and while you'll find new avenues of exploration and new ways to contribute in your career, especially in more senior leadership positions, for example, there will also be a stage where you cease being particularly competitive at some of the work that defined the early part of your career. And rejection is a part of this. So while any one individual rejection could be random noise, random chance, it could be the result of toxic reviews, over a medium time frame, rejection is a weak signal providing you some feedback about whether you are competitive or relevant in a certain area. And this can be, again, quite confronting, because the idea that you are perhaps no longer as competitive as you were when you're a PhD and a postdoc in a highly technical area can be confronting, especially if you see that as part of your identity. And the typical example of this would be, as you become more senior, you are less hands on the tools, so to speak. And in very competitive, very fast-moving fields, you can't really half-time or part-time being relevant. You really have to be 110% committed, otherwise you'll gradually fall behind. And so if you have a series of rejections, there is always that nagging doubt, even for people who appear very confident on the outside, that this is the signal that's getting increasingly strong that you can no longer really play in a certain area. And again, this isn't the end of the world. It involves a change in sort of how you contribute in your career, a little bit of a change in your identity and how you might see yourself. But the process of going through it can be a little confronting, and rejection plays a central role in that. Over the years, over so many hundreds of rejections, I've learned, at least from my own perspective, a number of things that I think are important in dealing with rejection. First of all, if you are supervising people or collaborating with junior people, one of your key responsibilities is to ease them through that rejection. People can be very distraught, very upset, and one of your key roles is to provide mentorship and to provide the bigger picture perspective. They're still going to be really disappointed, but you can help them sort of get through it and then hopefully move on to resubmitting whatever it was better and better in subsequent submissions. Another key aspect of rejection is that rejection, to a limited extent, is a sign that you're doing things right. So if you are getting every single thing that you propose or submit accepted, two things are possible. One is that you are just simply not challenging yourself and you're going for very easy wins. Sometimes this is deliberate, sometimes this is accidental, but if you're getting everything accepted the first time, you are most likely not challenging yourself. You're not really putting yourself up there given your capabilities and skill set. Of course, at the other end, if you're getting rejected to an inordinate degree on repeated tries, then again, that is a weak signal that either you are not in a good position to propose what you're submitting, that the field or the people who are reviewing you are particularly toxic, although I don't think that's true in a lot of cases, or that you are setting your sights too high. Either way, it's a signal that perhaps you should sit back and reevaluate your approach and whether you should keep doing things the same way or maybe change some things up. Finally, one of the key things I've learned painfully is that you should always go out of your way, at least in my opinion, to celebrate, deliberately celebrate those rare successes. Now, this is super important because if you don't do that and you wait too long, then the next few rejections are going to come along and you're not going to feel necessarily like celebrating. So when you do get those wins, really, I would suggest to savor them, relish them, reflect back on all the challenges that you had to go through to get to that stage, and really savor the fact that your hard work and effort and persistence has actually paid off, and do it in the moment. Don't wait too long because that next rejection is just around the corner and it may totally kill your mood to celebrate. Rejection is a key part of any career. It is a sign that you are pushing yourself. A certain amount of rejection is really a healthy indicator that you've set your bar of what you're trying to achieve at about the right level. At the same time, the way in which rejection stings and sucks, and in my opinion it always sucks, will evolve over your career. How you respond to rejection will also change over your career, from being very individual and very personal to being about looking after the people involved or collaborating with you who are part of that rejection process, and ultimately, hopefully, improving what you're proposing or submitting to the point where it is accepted and it gets the recognition that it deserves.